Hello and welcome to Making It Manufacturing Spotlight Series. We're here live in New York at the DCAT conference. I have the pleasure of being joined by the CCO of Axplora, Arul Ramadurai. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks very much, Harry. It's one of those days, DCAT, you keep going from one meeting to another, and we're right in the middle of it.
2 days left.
It's all about making sure we get those meetings and making sure that we get value from them, frankly speaking. I think, that's probably the most important thing.
Momentum is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're probably meeting around 60 customers or so this week. So,
wow, it's amazing.
So we need to make sure that we're giving and gaining value from this week.
Arul, for our listeners who may not know the company as well, how would you describe Axplora today and where it fits in the broader CDMO landscape?
Yeah, so Axplora is a combination of three companies. So we came together in 2022. So that's PharmaZell, Farmabios, and Novasep. And we're a CDMO in essentially three areas. Small molecules, which is probably a large part of our footprint. And then we have a whole bunch of specialized technologies. So we are pioneers in purification and chromatography. So we, as Novasep, we were one of the first people to build the columns several decades ago. And these are columns that are used, for example, in all the GLP-1 peptides that we see out there. So purification, chromatography of different types of molecules, that's the second space we're active in. And then the third space where we have a standing is in ADCs. So we've been in ADCs from the early days. So we actually manufacture 6 commercial ADCs today. So we've got a track record there in our site in France, in Le Mans. So we're, just to give you an idea of Axplora, it's 9 sites around the world.
Yeah.
Mostly Europe. 7 of them are Europe. So 4 in France, 2 in Germany, 1 in Italy, and we have 2 sites in India as well.
Okay.
So that's our footprint, and our customer base is largely worldwide. So all 3 continents. So North America, Europe, Asia. We have good presence in each of the continents.
So just to touch on the customer base. So you operate in some really high complex areas, like you were saying, API manufacturing, from HP APIs to ADCs. From your perspective then, what are the customers really looking for in their partners today within the CDMO space?
Yeah, so look, in the end of the day, we all have an obligation, I think, in this space to ourselves as humans, right? We work in healthcare. We're all about improving health outcomes, and I think we work in a cool space, which is medicines, right? So we're coming from a long background, long history, and we're working with chemistry and biology to make medicines that make a difference to patients' lives. And so our customers, of course, are pharma and biotech companies. Largely, that's who they are, and what they're looking for, of course, is one of the first things would be speed. They want to make sure that you're able to get molecules to and through the clinic as soon as possible. They want to, of course, have a reliable supply, manufacturing. So if you're a biotech or a pharma, what are you looking for? You're looking for your R&D engine to work, so you come up with novel molecules, with molecules that are going to make a difference to patients. You want to get them through the clinic as soon as possible, and then you want to be able to commercialize them as soon as possible. That's basically what our customers are looking for. So which means that speed, clear, is very important. Reliable supply. So reliability, I think, is is critical, actually, in this business. And then the third thing is to do it in a way where biotechs and pharma companies can focus on their R&D engines, which means they also are looking for efficiency.
Yeah.
So if we're able to deliver speed, reliability, and efficiency, I think that's really what our customers are looking for.
So, where do you find then the balance between getting the speed element along with the efficiency? Where do you combine the two? Because they have to go hand in hand, obviously. That's what your customers are looking for. But to build that reliability, you have to have the right balance between the two.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, people sometimes talk about a trade-off between the two.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's necessarily always the case. So I think, look, we come from a very strong technological background. So that's, we have around 15 different technologies, in different spaces.
Yeah.
And I think these technologies enable us to industrialize our molecules, because, we're doing, of course, a lot of R&D, but really we're an industrial powerhouse. That's what we do. Industrial chemistry is where we are strongest, or separation technology. So what that means is that we are always looking, when we look at a process that comes to us, we look at it and we say, what does that mean in terms of the cycle times? What does that mean in terms of the yields? And what does that mean in terms of our footprint? And what is the best asset fit? So when we look at our 9 sites, we'd always have a look at it agnostically to say, okay, here's a process that's coming in. This is a molecule that we have out there. What is the best asset fit? And what that does, that drives down cycle time.
Yeah.
Right? And when you drive down cycle time, when you drive up the yield, because those are the strengths we have with our R&D, what that does is naturally also takes cost down.
Okay.
Right? So it's not a case of it's a trade-off between speed and efficiency. I think at many cases in what we do, we're able to drive that efficiency and speed at the same time.
Amazing. So we're in a market that's, constantly evolving, but it's also constant change that might be out of everyone's control. Yeah, it's out of companies' control, with the landscape, the politics, etc. How do you feel Axplora managed to adapt to, current changes within the CDMO space?
Yeah, look, the CDMO space is quite exciting, and I think it's totally transformed in the last decade or two, right? That's something we see. I think let's just start off with, again, the end consumer in mind, the patients. If you look at the efficacy of molecules we have today in most therapeutic areas, it's phenomenal compared to where we were just even 20 years ago. And I think this is fabulous. This is something that the whole industry can be proud of. And I think as CDMOs, we can be proud of the fact that we're very much part of it. And I think what you're seeing in terms of a shift, even for some of the larger customers that we have, is they're going out to CDMOs for specialized technologies, for the speed, for this efficiency, for investments that we make that they don't have to, because then they can focus on their R&D engines.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the developments we certainly see in our space, which plays to our strengths, because our core capabilities are taking that process, scaling it up, making it an industrial molecule that can reliably deliver volumes for the customer so that they can focus on their R&D. So that's kind of the landscape we're in. Now, you talked about the geopolitics. There's a lot of things that are going on that are out of our control. And so we always have our ears to the ground to understand what's going on and to get a sense of what are the things that we're able to control. And there's plenty we're able to control. As I just spoke to you about, we can decide in terms of together with the customer, where do these molecules go in our network? What would be the best asset fit? What does that mean in terms of cycle times? What sort of, philosophy do we have when it comes to, for example, our own raw materials? So we typically end up either dual sourcing our raw materials, or we end up with a lot of stock for those raw materials which are critical.
Yeah.
Right. So by doing those things, we make sure that we don't get into trouble for our customers. Right. This is very important. So during the pandemic, for example, this worked quite well. We didn't face any major issues at that time. And I think this is how we need to think about it even in these days, right, where we are seeing a lot of change in the world. Medicines are needed. And how do we make sure that those medicines get to patients? Right. And look, we have customers of all sorts. We work with aid agencies. We work with, obviously with pharma biotechs, but nonetheless, I think our obligation, our mindset is always, what can we do to make sure we can deliver the security of supply? Because this is what our customers are looking for.
So say on that then, we were sat here having the same conversation in 5 years. Where do you see the future of Axplora going to?
Yeah, so look, as an organization, what we're seeing is, we put these three companies together, PharmaZell, Farmabios, and Novasep. And I think what we're doing is we're raising the standards across the board. We're saying, yes, we're a small molecule powerhouse, but what it means is that we want to be able to constantly keep improving that speed and efficiency while maintaining that reliable supply. So what are the things that we need to do to get there? So I think in 5 years' time, you're probably going to see Axplora as a mix, if I had to predict, still going very strong on ADCs because we have that heritage, we have that track record. And these molecules are some of the most efficacious molecules known to man today in a space like oncology, which has such high unmet need. And so I think that I anticipate growing. I anticipate also that with these GLP-1 peptides, and we've talked about, we've invested more than 100 million, for example, just in the last year. We're looking at investing in all our sites, and GLP-1 peptides has been a very big area where we worked with a partner to bring something online which is going to be transformational, right? Mm-hmm. So we're probably increasing our footprint in that area. We're increasing our footprint, I suspect, in ADCs in the next 5 years. And we will always be this differentiated European CDMO, which means for small molecules, because that's the large part of a very large part of our business. Mm-hmm. This is where a lot of our understanding of the chemistry and the science has been built over several decades, and that's what we will continue to push further.
And do you feel that's what potentially gives you the X factor in the market at the moment?
Yeah, look, one of the things that I've been trying to push very hard in our organization since I joined is, we can be better prepared for the future if we have a really good understanding of what our customers' needs are. Yeah. Right? And what I'm driving our organization to do is to get better at that. So historically, if you look, probably 20 years ago, or even perhaps even more recent, it was great to have all these brochures, and, people would show these brochures to different pharma companies, and that's great. And what I'm trying to say is, let's change that mindset, guys, at Axplora. What we need to do is understand our customers better than anyone else out there. Yeah. And if we're able to do that, we can tailor our offering to exactly what the customer needs. Exactly. Right? And if we do that, then I think we're in a different place. Yeah. Right? So getting into a level of detail, and so I expect this of our commercial folks, of our operational folks, of the entire organization. Let's really understand what is it that's driving the customer's requirements. Because if you're in phase 1, it's very different from what you might be in phase 3. If you're a small biotech compared to someone who's well established as a big pharma, it's very different. So you need to really get a good sense in a structured manner of what those needs are. And I think that's the X factor we probably bring in. Because if we are able to understand those needs better than anyone else, we can provide solutions that will really add significant value to every one of our customers.
The adaptability to the customer's needs.
Absolutely, while being very clear that, look, as a CDMO, so I talked about investments they were making. We are not making speculative investments. Yeah. That's not the way we operate. Mm-hmm. We are listening to customers' needs. We were listening. We brought along this new workshop, for example, in our site in Le Mans for ADCs. We've just announced an investment in our site in Gropello for HPAPIs. Why are we doing that? Because we're hearing from our customers that they need more capacity with players with a track record. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not just a case of, okay, we need capacity, but we need players who know the pitfalls, have done things, been there, done that, and they can come now and basically advise us, help us. And that scalability now is needed. And that's the reason why we invest. Yeah. Right? And so I think it's less about making bets, and it's more about really understanding what customers truly want. And if you're able to get there, because sometimes you probably have noticed this as well in the marketplace, customers have a good idea of what they want, but they may not be able to get it across to you in a way that helps you and them.
Yeah, it's a partnership.
And absolutely. So once you get to that partnership, I think we can really do something in a different level.
Arul, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I just want to dive a bit into your leadership style. So as CCO, you sit at the intersection of customer needs, market shifts, and internal strategy. So how do you feel that's the way it's shaped the way you think about leadership these days?
Yeah. So look, I think we're now in a completely different era with a lot of uncertainty, as you were just saying. That's where we sit. But I think there are some fundamentals that remain the same. So so whether it's myself, my peer, the COO, or our CEO, the three of us are constantly aligning, making sure that we are talking the same language to all our people in our different factories. Mm-hmm. Whether that's commercial folks or operational folks or whoever, support functions, we need to be able to talk the same language. We do it in our own distinctive styles, but we talk the same language. I think that's crucial. The other thing is, it's got to be very clear, where do we stand as an organization for everyone? So clarity, I think, is important, right? So clarity on, okay, what does good look like? Mm-hmm. Where are we against that good? And in some cases, maybe we're already at that good, Well, then what's the next level? In some cases, maybe we're not that good.
Yeah.
How do we get to good?
Yeah.
Right? So these things I think are very important to have that clarity across the organization and the alignment.
Yeah.
People need to buy into that.
Yeah.
If they don't buy into that, then it doesn't matter. Right? Because you're thinking, oh, yeah, but I'm already good, aren't I? Well, yeah, maybe in certain things, but not perhaps everything else. So I think it's important to get that alignment across the organization. So that's one of the most important things. So I would say all three of us, and I include myself in that when you asked about leadership style, we like to go deep. We like to understand, in my case, certainly the customer's requirements, their needs very deeply.
Yeah.
So asking a lot of questions on the one hand, but also then pulling out insights from our own backgrounds and our experience. So we put it together. Once we have that, then I think we can translate that into something useful for our organization.
Of course.
And once we're able to do that, then I think we need to live it. So we see ourselves, I see myself very much as one of the people who also gets deeply into the subject matter. I want our teams also to be very deep in the subject matter, and we work together.
Yeah.
Right. And then there are times probably we need to, go back to the helicopter view and look at the strategy and see whether it makes sense. And that's our job. So that's something absolutely also that we need to do. But I think the thing that's probably the most critical, especially for the size of organization we are, we're around 2,000 people, right? That's who we are. I think it's important to be able to touch different parts of the organization, to go really where the action is, and to really be this fantastic jargon that you've heard, being hands-on. I think you've got to be hands-on. This is not about status. This is about getting things done. And I think that's the beauty of the sort of company we work for, the size of company we work for. We can move things very quickly, and we've shown that in the past. And I think this is something that is important to me as well as a personal value. Cool. So working quickly at speed, and even if it means, sometimes we get it wrong, we get it wrong. Let's just make sure that it's not a big screw up, right?
It's how we learn from our mistakes as well.
Absolutely. And then constantly, and I think this learning is super important. How do we make sure that, even if something went extremely well, we don't sit on our laurels?
Yeah.
What are the things we could have done even better? I talked about how can we get to know the customer better than anyone else? How can you deliver a project better than anyone else?
Yeah.
How can we really make that offering much sharper, much more granular? It's across the board. It's in our marketing and communications. Maybe you've seen some of our LinkedIn posts and over the last few months. And again, we're pushing really hard to say, we got to get more granular. We got to get clearer. We got to really be able to push that envelope. So, achievement is really getting to the next level, being able to deliver a better quality service for our customers. And we only do that by really getting to know our customers really well.
Arul, this has been an absolute pleasure speaking. It's been very insightful. I'm just going to finish off with one more question. As CCO of Axplora, what today is really exciting you about driving this company forward?
Look, I think the impact that we're seeing already in the programs is probably the piece that's very rewarding, right? So if you just look at the last year, we've won significant projects on all of our sites. These are having a real impact on people's lives, whether that's your employees, whether that's your customers and their patients. I think this is super cool.
Yeah.
And I think being part of such a supply chain and being part of an organization which is having such an impact, we're probably serving a million patients a year.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Right?
Yeah.
And this is brilliant. So I think this impact that you can have and that you can do that at a pace that is excellent for the size of our organization. This is super cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. 2,000 people, touching over 1 million patients' lives. So unbelievable. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Harry.